Carlo Ancelotti had a choice, Italy or Brazil. He picked Brazil, and he explained exactly why in his own words. Then he turned around and told his own country what's broken about their football. That's the story we're telling today. So Carlo Ancelotti is out here running the biggest job in international football. And it isn't with the Azzurri. Let's get into what he said, and why Italy is still dealing with the fallout. Italy's football federation is in genuine crisis. The Azzurri failed to qualify for a third straight World Cup, and the fallout was immediate. Four-time champion Italy missed out on a third straight World Cup after a playoff loss to Bosnia and Herzegovina in March, prompting the resignations of FIGC President Gabriel Gravina and coach Gennaro Gattuso. That's not a small failure, that's a federation gutted from the top down. So what did the FIGC do? They went shopping at the very top of world football. The Italian Soccer Federation talked to former Manchester City coach Pep Guardiola and Brazil boss Carlo Ancelotti about taking over the crisis-hit national team, hoping to announce the new Italy coach within the week. This wasn't a rumor floated by a tabloid. It came straight from the man running the search. Paolo Maldini, the Italy and AC Milan legend now serving as the federation's technical director, confirmed it himself, asked directly about Guardiola in a press conference. He admitted, "Today we can't give news about what's happening. You've identified one of our targets," and added, "We can't hide that we also talked with Carlo Ancelotti before talking with Pep." Read that again. Ancelotti was the first call. Not Guardiola, not Conte, not Mancini, Ancelotti. The guy who's Italian, who grew up playing in Serie A, who's won league titles across 5 different countries. He was priority number 1 for a federation on its knees, and he turned it down flat. Multiple reports confirm the outcome. Carlo Ancelotti formally turned down the proposal to become the new head coach of Italy's national team. Talks had begun around 2 weeks earlier, when Italian officials sought to gauge his willingness to take charge of the Azzurri. As part of their new sporting project, he heard them out and he said no. Here's where it gets uncomfortable for Italy. The coach reaffirmed his total commitment to the Brazil national team, confirming he will honor his contract through 2030, ruling out a return to his home country and continuing his project. In charge of the 5-time world champions. Through 2030, that's not a coach keeping his options open. That's a coach closing the door on his homeland and locking it. But the real gut punch didn't come from the rejection itself. It came from something Ancelotti said months earlier, when he was first asked about the Italy job before Gattuso's collapse. In an interview with Marca, he was blunt about why Brazil got him and Italy never even tried. Italy, right now it's coached by a friend of mine, Spalletti, who's a fantastic manager. They didn't call me. Something Brazil had already done a while ago. The circumstances lined up now, and I fully embrace the challenge of bringing Brazil its 6th World Cup. Sit with that for a second. Italy, his own country, a nation that had already missed multiple World Cups, by that point never even picked up the phone. Brazil did, and Ancelotti went where he was wanted. That single line did more damage to Italian football's pride than any playoff loss could. It wasn't Ancelotti attacking Italy directly. It was worse, it was Ancelotti describing, matter-of-factly, how little Italy valued him compared to a country on the other side of the Atlantic. "It's easy," he said of choosing Brazil. "It's the best national team in the world. I'm not the one saying it, the 5 stars on the shirt say it. No other national team comes close. Now I have the challenge of winning the 6th, no hedging, no diplomatic dodge." He compared the 2 federations, and Brazil won every category that mattered to him. Now, 3 individuals close to this story reacted in very different ways. Once the news landed, Maldini, still hunting for a coach on Italy's behalf, kept working the phones, his federation's shortlist now down to names like Antonio Conte, Roberto Mancini, and Andrea Pirlo, all Italians who never left home the way Ancelotti had. Former Italy coaches Roberto Mancini, who led the Azzurri to the European Championship in 2021, and Antonio Conte were among the favorites to take charge, with Andrea Pirlo, who helped Italy win the World Cup in 2006 as a player, also reportedly in contention. Meanwhile, in Brazil, the reaction was the opposite of heartbreak, it was relief. The CBF's own president, Ednaldo Rodrigues, had already been on record calling the appointment obvious, saying flatly that Ancelotti was unanimously respected by every player who'd ever worked under him. And Italian football writer Peter Young summed up the mood back home simply: the coaching search rules him out of the running to take over as head coach of the Italy national team following the departure of Gennaro Gattuso. So there it is, 3 separate camps, 3 separate reactions, and Italy on the losing end of all of them. A federation that had to go begging, a coach who'd already made his peace with Brazil, and a homeland left holding nothing but the reasons why. That's the hook. Now let's rewind and understand exactly how deep this crisis in Italian football actually runs, because the rejection only stings this much once you see the full picture of what Italy has become. To To understand why Ancelotti's snub landed the way it did, you have to understand what Italian football looks like right now. It's not a proud giant asking a favorite son for help. It's a nation in freefall. Start with the number that says it all, 3. Italy suffered heartache on penalties to Bosnia and Herzegovina, confirming a 16-year absence from the World Cup for the 4-time winners. 16 years, an entire generation of Italian kids has grown up, never once watching their national team play in the tournament that defines the sport. The match itself was brutal, one of the most glittering football nations historically. The Azzurri could not fend off Bosnia and Herzegovina in a playoff final, despite taking the lead through Moises Kean. A red card for Alessandro Bastoni gave the hosts hope, and Haris Tankovic's equalizer pushed the tie into extra time and penalties, where Pio Esposito and Brian Cristante missed, to ensure Gattuso's side would sit at home this summer. The country didn't just lose, it imploded. Italy woke up angry and disillusioned after the national team missed out for the 3rd time in a row, prolonging a sporting nightmare for the football-mad country, with Corriere della Sera running the front-page headline, "The World Cup Curse." The newspapers didn't hold back either. Tuttosport ran with Via Tutti. Everyone out, with columnist Guido Vasiego declaring sweeping changes, and underlining there must be consequences at every level. Both La Gazzetta dello Sport and Corriere dello Sport went with, "We're all staying at home." This wasn't just sports page anger, it reached the government. Italy's sport minister said the Football Federation boss should step down, after the national team failed to qualify for a 3rd consecutive World Cup. When a cabinet minister is weighing in on a coaching search, you know the wound goes beyond football. On the streets, the anger was raw. Frustration exploded in the stands and on the streets. Italy had now missed 3 straight World Cups, leaving an entire generation without seeing the Azzurri on the biggest stage. And the reaction from fans was immediate and full of anger. Fans in Rome described it as something close to a nightmare, mourning a tournament they wouldn't get to see for yet another cycle. And this crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It's been building for over a decade. Back in 2014, when they crashed out in the group stage, no one would have imagined this. If someone had said Italy would miss the next 3 World Cups, they would have been laughed at, but that's now the reality. Italy have not played a World Cup match since 2014, and even more strikingly, they haven't won a knockout game since lifting the trophy in 2006. Think about that trajectory, a country with 4 World Cup stars on its shirt. A country that beat France in a final not even 20 years ago, has gone from champions to spectators, twice missing out to teams most casual fans couldn't name off the top of their head. The coaching carousel tells the same story of instability. Gattuso had taken over from the fired Luciano Spalletti only the previous June, with the squad already flailing following a defeat at Norway in its opening qualifier. One bad result, one coach gone, next guy in, same result. It's a federation chasing its tail. Even before the Bosnia collapse, the cracks were visible. During a meaningless qualifier in Moldova, the frustration among Italy's own supporters spilled onto the pitch. Federico Di Marco couldn't wait to get off the pitch at the end of a late win against Moldova, with his Italy teammates and Gattuso not far behind, none of them acknowledging the traveling Italy supporters who had made the trip. While protests against the federation and chants directed at the players prompted the coach to hit back, Gattuso's own words at the time captured the tension. "This is not the time to tell the players to go get a job." He said, "Honestly, I don't accept the fans jeering. Now we all need to stay united." They weren't united. Weeks later, he was gone. This is the wreckage Maldini walked into. As technical director, this is why the federation needed a name so big. It could paper over years of dysfunction in one press conference. And this is why Ancelotti, an Italian who'd already conquered England, Spain, France, and Germany, was the first phone call they made. Except he'd already made a different choice. Long before Gattuso's exit, long before the Bosnia disaster, Ancelotti had already picked a different national team to build with. To understand why he never even hesitated, you have to go back to how Brazil landed him in the first place, and just how badly they wanted him compared to how little his own country ever had. While Italy was busy hiring and firing coaches every calendar year, Brazil was doing something almost unthinkable for the most decorated footballing nation on earth, begging. It started with a federation that had run out of patience with itself. Previous coach Dorival Jr. was sacked in March, after a 4-1 thumping by rivals Argentina in qualifying. A 5-time World Cup winner, humiliated on home turf by their fiercest continental rival. That's the moment Brazil decided enough was enough, and they weren't going to promote from within this time. Real Madrid coach Carlo Ancelotti would be an obvious choice to fill Brazil's vacant managerial position if he became available. Brazilian FA president Ednaldo Rodrigues told Reuters, acknowledging the Italian was his main target and everyone's favorite to be in charge. Not a fallback option, the main target publicly. From the man running the federation, Rodriguez didn't stop at logistics. He made it personal. Ancelotti is unanimously respected among players. Not only Ronaldo Nazario or Vinicius Jr., but all those that have played for him, Rodriguez said. I really admire him for his honesty in the way he works, and how constant his work is. Ronaldo Nazario, one of the greatest strikers Brazil has ever produced, name-dropped by his own federation president as a character reference. For a foreign coach, that's the level of institutional buy-in Ancelotti walked into. And it wasn't just the suits in charge, the players wanted him too, badly enough that it created an actual conflict of interest. For one of Real Madrid's own stars, Vinicius Jr., who was playing under Ancelotti at Real Madrid at the time, admitted the situation put him in a bind. For me, it's really hard to talk about it because if I have him with Brazil, I would lose him in Real Madrid. And if I have him with Real Madrid, I would not have him with Brazil, Vinicius told reporters. But even torn between two loyalties, Vinicius couldn't help but campaign for it. Ancelotti is the best coach I ever had, he said. He is very fond of me, and that sentiment is mutual. I believe he would be very helpful here, as he is in Real Madrid. He went further, invoking Brazilian legends who'd played under Ancelotti at club level. He is also very fond of the Brazilian players. The great Ronaldo Nazario talks a lot about him. He tells me that Ancelotti is also the best coach he had in his career. Brazilian legend Zico added his own endorsement, framing Ancelotti's biggest asset as something beyond tactics entirely. Ancelotti would be ideal because everyone, including opponents, respects him, Zico said. He knows football and is aware that players are more important than tactics. Compare that chorus: a federation president, a Real Madrid Ballon d'Or contender, and a World Cup winning legend, all publicly campaigning for one man, to Italy's approach, which amounted to a single, quiet conversation 2 weeks before Ancelotti said no. Not everyone in Brazil was thrilled, to be fair. There was real resistance to hiring a foreigner for the most sacred job in Brazilian sport. Former World Cup winner Emerson Leo didn't hide his frustration. All the big clubs are being run by foreigners. Where is Brazil? Where are the Brazilian coaches? Where are the people leading this show? He asked on CNN. He went further, calling it a symptom of a generation of Brazilian coaches unwilling to fight for the job. But the old guard mostly came around. Other greats endorsed the move. The last two World Cup winning Brazil coaches, Pereira and Scolari, offered their blessings to the Italian, and Ancelotti even received a replica of a jacket worn by Mario Zagallo, one of Brazil's most symbolic figures, as a welcome gift. That jacket wasn't just a gift. It was Brazilian football handing him a piece of its own history. There was even a scenario where Ancelotti never gets the job at all. Portuguese coach Jorge Jesus revealed he was in the running before Ancelotti's appointment was finalized. Jesus told Canal 11 he ended up not taking charge of the Brazilian national team, but had already been approached to draw up a preliminary squad after Brazil's 4-1 loss to Argentina. Brazil had a backup plan. Italy didn't even have a plan A that included calling him. This is the contrast that makes the rejection sting. One country moved mountains, name-dropped its own legends, and handed him symbolic gifts from its most sacred football icons. The other assumed he'd always be available, right up until it was too late. So when Ancelotti finally spoke publicly about why he picked Brazil over the country of his birth, it wasn't really a mystery. He'd already told everyone. Let's get into his own words. By the time Ancelotti sat down for interviews explaining his choice, the reasoning was consistent everywhere he went, and none of it was subtle. Start with the emotional pitch. Speaking about what pulled him to Brazil in the first place, he didn't talk about tactics or salary. He talked about feeling something he'd never felt before in a career that had already taken him through 5 major European leagues. Managing the Brazilian national team, the most successful in history, was an opportunity I couldn't refuse. Ancelotti said, I knew about the passion here, but living it is different. When Brazil play, the country stops. That's not a coach describing a job. That's a coach describing an obsession he'd only understood from a distance, until he was living inside it. He backed it up with cold, simple logic in his interview with Marca. It's easy, he said. It's the best national team in the world. I'm not the one saying it, the 5 stars on the shirt say it. No other national team comes close. 5 World Cup titles sitting right there on the crest. For a manager who spent his whole career chasing trophies, Brazil represented the biggest trophy cabinet in the sport before he'd even coached a single game. And then there's the line that did the most damage to Italy's ego, worth repeating in full context. When directly asked about his own country's vacancy, he shrugged it off with something close to indifference. Italy, right now it's coached by a friend of mine, Spalletti, who's a fantastic manager. They didn't call me. something Brazil had already done a while ago. He wasn't attacking Italy, that's what made it worse. He was simply stating a fact calmly. The way you'd explain why you took one job offer over another that never actually arrived. Once in the role, Ancelotti didn't treat it as a retirement tour or an easy paycheck. He immersed himself completely. He did a crash course in Portuguese when he got the job. And a year on, he freely switches between Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and English in any news conference. Against Scotland, much to the delight of the fans watching, TV cameras picked out Ancelotti singing the national anthem. Former Brazil international Zé Elias, speaking to ESPN, pointed to that adaptability as the real reason skeptics started coming around. I don't think he needs to convince anyone. His day-to-day work at the club speaks for itself. And with the national team, he's done a good job, Zé Elias said. It took him a little while to understand, in some respects, the public outcry. What Brazil is like, what Brazil means in relation to soccer, or what soccer means in Brazil. It's one thing to see it from the outside, it's another thing to experience it day to day, to understand the Brazilian mindset. Silas, who played for Brazil across 2 World Cups in the 80s and 90s, offered a more cautious read, telling ESPN he believed. He's succeeding in winning over doubters, but there's still a long and arduous road ahead. Even his lineup decisions reflected a manager unbothered by outside noise, the same trait that let him brush off Italy's approach without a second thought. He called up 34-year-old defender Danilo when many thought his best days were behind him, and he stuck with Casemiro in the face of public opposition. This is a manager who makes decisions on his own terms, whether that's a lineup or a national team job offer. He even let himself dream out loud about a match that would put Brazil and Italy on the exact same pitch, at the exact same time, under his own management of one and not the other. I would like a final between Brazil and Italy, he admitted in an interview. He doubled down on it elsewhere, calling the idea of facing his homeland at the World Cup's final hurdle something close to poetry. That single wish tells you everything about where his loyalty actually sits. He wasn't fantasizing about coaching Italy to glory. He was fantasizing about beating them with somebody else's shirt on. Now, the question everyone was really asking once Brazil's tournament actually kicked off. Did the decision pay off? Did staying loyal to the country that wanted him actually deliver the World Cup he was chasing? That's where things get complicated and where Italy's wound gets its final layer of salt. Brazil's World Cup didn't go the way the fairy tale demanded. And that's exactly what makes Ancelotti's choice worth revisiting now. Ancelotti struggled to lift Brazil's level at the tournament, as they played out an underwhelming group stage draw with Morocco, and required a late turnaround to beat Japan in the round of 32. Not the dominant march through the bracket that Brazil's federation had been promised, when they built their entire project around one man. Then came the exit that will define this cycle. Brazil fell at the round of 16 against an Erling Haaland-inspired Norway team, despite appointing 5-time champions, league-winning boss Ancelotti last May. After the Norway game, Ancelotti was criticized for bringing on Neymar while the game was goalless, with Brazil slumping to a humiliating exit despite the veterans scoring a late consolation from the penalty spot. This year's competition was the first time Brazil fell as early as the round of 16, since they lost to rivals Argentina back in 1990. 36 years, that's the historical company this exit now keeps. It even opened the door to second-guessing about whether the job should have gone elsewhere in the first place. Jorge Jesus, the man who'd been in the frame before Ancelotti got the call, reflected on what he might have done differently. Brazilian players are born to play. Even in the Brazilian league, there's a lot of quality, Jesus said. Would I have picked a different squad to Ancelotti's? At least 1 or 2 players, yes. He specifically pointed to Flamengo forward Pedro as someone he'd have included that Ancelotti didn't. And yet, despite the disappointment, despite the round of 16 exit, despite the criticism over game management against Norway, Ancelotti didn't budge an inch on his commitment. Ancelotti has committed to staying for the 2030 tournament, the same pledge he'd already made to the federation directly. Whatever doubts Brazil's press had about his tactics in that Norway match, none of it shook his resolve to finish what he started. That's the part that really lands the whole story home. Italy came calling with a fresh start on offer, a clean federation reset, a technical director in Maldini building something new, an entire nation desperate for its most successful living coach to come fix 16 years of heartbreak. And Ancelotti said no to all of it, even after his own new team hit its lowest point of the tournament on the biggest stage there is. He'd already explained himself before any of this played out, and none of it changed once results got rocky. The only team I could coach after Brazil would be Real Madrid, he said. I don't think that's going to happen. I have a 1-year contract here. And then anything can happen. I signed for 1 year because I think it was the right thing to do. Even when talking about life after this job, Italy's name never came up. Real Madrid did, his country didn't. So where does that leave things? Italy is still searching. Maldini's federation is still working the phones, still weighing Conte, Mancini, Pirlo. Italians who never got the phone call that mattered more. The one from Brazil first. The wound from missing 3 straight World Cups hasn't healed. And it won't heal by 2030 either. Since that's exactly how long Ancelotti has locked himself into Brazil's project. For Brazil, the mission is unfinished, but the partnership is intact. A round of 16 exit stings, but it hasn't shaken the trust between Ancelotti and the federation that pursued him harder than anyone ever pursued him for Italy. He'll get 4 more years to try to deliver that 6 star. The number he brought up unprompted the very first time he explained why he took the job. And somewhere in the middle of all that sits one plain fact that Italian football will have to sit with for a long time. Their most successful living coach picked a country 10,000 kilometers away, stuck with that decision through a rocky World Cup exit, and explained the whole thing with a shrug. Because when it mattered, Brazil called and Italy simply didn't. Sources: Italy in crisis. Federation sounds out Pep Guardiola and Carlo Ancelotti for coach Paolo Maldini explains talks with Guardiola and Ancelotti over Italy job. Turned down Italy. Ancelotti rejects offer. Will stay with Brazil. Former Real Madrid manager Carlo Ancelotti offers honest take on taking Brazil job. Former Real Madrid coach Carlo Ancelotti reveals only one club he would coach after the Brazil job. Brazil versus Italy in 2026 World Cup final. Ancelotti says it would be beautiful. It would be beautiful. Carlo Ancelotti reveals dream World Cup final. Jesus reveals he almost took Brazil job before Ancelotti appointment. Why Ancelotti is key to Brazil winning 6th World Cup title. ESPN. Legacy: why Brazil ditched tradition and turned to Carlo Ancelotti. 3 reasons why Carlo Ancelotti can succeed with Brazil. CBF President Rodriguez admits Ancelotti to Brazil would be a no-brainer. Carlo Ancelotti would be great fit as Brazil coach, says Vinicius Jr. Everyone out. Furious Italian newspapers react after Italy failed to qualify. Outrage in Italy. Fans react after another World Cup failure. The fallout from Italy's failure to qualify for the World Cup. FIFA. The World Cup curse. Outcry as Italy miss out for 3rd time in a row. Heartbreak again. Italy miss 3rd straight World Cup. Italy's quest to the World Cup is yet again through a playoff. ESPN https://Africa. ESPN.com/football/story/ID/46,957,645 Italy's quest FIFA World Cup yet again playoff.